When whiskey comes straight from the barrel, it's called cask strength. It can reach 120, 125, sometimes even 130 proof. Far stronger than what most people are used to. To put that into perspective, the majority of whiskeys you'll find on the shelf are around a 90 or 100 proof, which means about 45 to 50% alcohol by volume. Those bottles have already been proofed down with water before bottling, making smoother, more approachable, and an easier whiskey to drink. But cask strength is different. It's intense. One sip hits you with a fiery burn before your palate can even catch up. For those who love it, it's bold and unforgettable. But for others, it's just too much. That's why you'll sometimes see someone add a drop or two of water to their glass of whiskey. At first glance, it looks like they're watering it down, weakening it. But that small dilution does something truly remarkable. It opens up the whiskey. The heat settles, and the deeper flavors rise up. Vanilla and caramel from the oak barrel, spice from the char, fruit notes from fermentation. The whiskey doesn't get weaker, it actually gets clearer. And leadership can be a lot like that. Some moments call for full proof, strength, conviction, bold direction. But other moments require a drop of water, empathy, patience, humility, to reveal what's hidden beneath the heat. Because great leadership, like great whiskey, isn't defined by strength alone. It's defined by its balance, knowing when to pour at full proof and when to temper just enough to let the true character come through. That's what this episode of Craft to Clarity explores, the art of leading with strength and substance without losing what makes it human. As mentioned in the opening, whiskey straight from the barrel can be intense, bold, fiery, sometimes even overwhelming. That's why most bottles are proofed down before they reach the shelf, and why adding just a drop of water can actually open up the flavors instead of weakening them. Leadership works in much the same way. Some moments call for cask strength, all conviction, no compromise, but more often it's that drop of water, empathy, humility, accessibility, that allows leadership to really be received. That brings to mind a leader I once worked for. He would walk into every room at cask strength. Strong voice, strong delivery, strong opinions, always at full intensity. And while some people admired the force, most found it difficult to take in. His strategy wasn't wrong. His ideas had merit, but the proof at which they came across, well, it was simply too strong for most people around him. I'll come back to his story in a bit. As leaders, there are moments when full strength is exactly what's needed. In a crisis, when decisions can't wait. In a moment of conviction, when values are on the line. In vision casting, when teams need clarity and courage. But more often, leadership isn't about proving strength. It's about helping others find theirs. And that requires tempering. Knowing when to pour full proof and when to ease it just enough for others to receive it. But there's a danger in that. When leaders only show up at cask strength, it doesn't just affect that moment. It shapes the way people experience every moment with them. Just like tasting a high-proof whiskey can make a lower-proof whiskey seem flat or underwhelming, leaders who are always intense condition the people around them to brace for that burn. They'll miss the nuance. They can't taste the depth of leadership, even when it's there. And this dynamic can show up in organizations too. Marketing at cask strength often overwhelms the very people it's meant to reach. Heavy with jargon, too forceful, too much heat, not enough clarity. When the message is too strong or it's misaligned with the purpose, it's like whiskey that is so overproofed, it's undrinkable. On the other hand, when marketing is watered down, it loses its edge. It becomes bland, forgettable, just another voice in the noise. And that's what happens when organizations try to market to everyone, so everyone likes them. But that usually doesn't work. The real craft is knowing the audience and proofing the message to reach them with both strength and clarity. And here's where it might be a bit uncomfortable. Many leaders spend years showing up at Cask strength because they had to, or at least they thought they had to. Success conditions leaders to believe that intensity is the only way to prove their value. But often that intensity is really just a facade, a mask. It's what impostor syndrome does. Leaders feel the need to project confidence, strength, certainty, even when they're not sure. They talk more than they listen. They never admit doubt. They hide behind data, jargon, or even the force of will. They overcompensate by raising their proof. On the surface, people see strength, but underneath the surface, many leaders are asking, am I leading from who I am or for who I think I need to be? That's what it means to lead at a higher proof than they were made for. The real depth, the subtle flavors of their leadership, gets lost in that full strength burn. And here's the beautiful part of that metaphor. In whiskey, the water isn't added during distillation. It's added later, after the aging process, right before bottling, when the whiskey is ready to be shared. Leaders are the same. Tempering rarely happens early. It usually comes after years of experience, when the questions of success give way to questions of significance. Is this my purpose? Is this really what I was made for? That's a critical moment, when the drop of water can make all the difference. So back to the leader I worked for. He eventually figured this out, not because of one big crisis, but because the signs were starting to pile up. He was seeing disengagement from his team, pushback on his ideas, execution was slowing down. The culture around him was quietly resisting. His leadership at Cask Strength wasn't creating results. It was actually creating distance. So he reached out for help, a coach, someone who walked with him and helped him rediscover the confidence in who he already was. Through that process, he realized that leadership wasn't about projecting intensity. It was about leading from the person he was created to be. As he tempered his approach, the change was remarkable. It wasn't the strategy that shifted. It wasn't the ideas. It was his delivery, his style, his intent. And just like whiskey that's proofed to the right level, his leadership became a little smoother, fuller, layered with depth and character. The hidden notes that had been masked by the burn came forward. Patience, humility, clarity, presence. The kind of leadership people could actually taste and carry with them. And here's a ripple effect. The culture around him began to change too. Instead of bracing for the burn, people started to lean in. Resistance gave way to engagement. Execution picked up momentum because it was no longer compliance. It was ownership. We know that leaders affect culture, and culture drives output. By finding the right proof, this leader didn't just change himself, he changed the environment around him. As you think about where you might be leading at Cask Strength, this isn't just about tempering your intensity. It's actually about rediscovering who you really are, who you were created to be, without hiding underneath that layer of heat and projection. So here are 3 ways to begin to find your true proof. 1. Pause before you pour. Notice the moments when you feel pressure to prove yourself, to perform, to defend, or fill the space. Those are often signs that you're leading from intensity rather than identity. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what does this moment really need? More force or more presence? 2. Add a drop of listening. When conversations start to heat up, resist the urge to speak first. Listening is like a drop of water that cools the moment and reveals what's actually there. The truth, the emotion, the insight. Most leaders discover their real strength is not in what they say, but in what they hear. And 3, refine your recipe. In whiskey, tasting notes are developed through observation, paying attention to what each batch reveals. And the same is true in leadership. Ask your team or those close to you, what do you experience when I lead? What stands out? What's missing? Don't take their feedback as criticism, because that's clarity. It's how the spirit improves. Because at the heart of it all, significance doesn't come from more strength. It comes from the right strength. The proof reflects your true character and your calling. When you find that proof, you're not performing anymore. You're actually leading from authenticity. You're living with purpose, and that's where success turns into significance. When I work with clients on leadership, I often say that clarity doesn't come from adding more. It comes from aligning with who you truly are and removing what doesn't belong, like the distillation process itself. So let me leave you with 3 questions. Where are you showing up at Cask Strength? Projecting an image that you think people need instead of leading from your true self. Where is your organization overwhelming people with intensity or diluting it so much that your message loses its edge? And personally, are you leading in a way that reveals who you were created to be? Because in leadership, just like whiskey, the finish matters. The finish is what lingers after you leave the room. The flavor people remember. Will they remember the burn or the balance? That's the question. Not what have I built, but what am I built for? For those new to whiskey, tasting notes are the lingering impressions, the flavors that stay with you after a sip of whiskey. Here are my tasting notes from today's conversation. Cask Strength leadership has its place, but only in moments of crisis or conviction. Proofing down doesn't weaken leaders. It actually reveals depth and character, the notes that usually get lost in the burn. Success drives leaders to prove their strength. Significance calls them to share it. The goal isn't to be the strongest in the room, it's to bring out the strength in others. High proof has its place in both whiskey and leadership, but it's knowing when to pour from that bottle and when to temper with just a drop or 2 of water. That's what makes it great. As we close, remember, clarity isn't found. It's crafted. Thanks for listening to Crafted Clarity. If you're a leader wrestling with the tension between success and significance, or you're trying to align your work with a deeper calling, I'd love to connect with you. If your organization is facing questions about strategy, whether it's alignment, ROI, or building confidence in your team, this is the work we do every day at iBrand. And if you walk this journey yourself, or maybe you're right in the middle of it, I'd love to hear your story and maybe even share it here on the podcast. You can find me at craftedclarity.net.